up next, we have a really important topic. It's about mining centralization. And I think this is one of those things that is very easy to get complacent about. It's very easy to not think about it, to just kind of say, well, that'll work itself out. But one of the people who's coming, or the person who's coming up here to talk about this next, Bitcoin Mechanic, he works directly with this all the time, and so he's the best person to hear about this from. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Bitcoin Mechanic, Chief Boiling Officer at Ocean. Please give him a warm welcome.
Hey everyone. I'm here to talk about decentralizing mining. So I work for Ocean. We are a relaunch of a pool Luke ran many years ago. Luke Dasher, who is the legendary core developer. One of the first pools to exist was called Eligius, and it basically worked with Bitcoin and used on a practical level what it offers us, and uses to a maximum extent everything you can possibly get out of Bitcoin in order to decentralize it as much as possible. So I guess it makes sense to start off by talking about what a mining pool is, because that's kind of been lost along with the definition of what mining is. So mining is, like everything in Bitcoin, starts off with running a node. And since Satoshi was around, that hasn't been a thing pretty much any miner in the world has done. They haven't run a node because they had no reason to. So that was a very big deviation from what Satoshi initially designed. And there's been horrible consequences for that. The main one being that the development of the Stratum protocol meant that if you wanted to split rewards with other miners, which is what every miner really wants to do, that most of the aspects of what mining is are no longer anything to do with what you're doing as a Bitcoin miner. So I'll harken back to the Ocean launch, which happened 2 years ago, where I sort of wanted to redefine these words. There are all these people out there in the world calling themselves Bitcoin miners, and they don't run Bitcoin nodes. So how can you be calling yourself a Bitcoin miner if you cannot interact with the network except through a permissioned third party? So the whole goal of Ocean was to say you need to be interacting directly with the chain. And if you're going to split rewards with other miners, that needs to be a tertiary layer where you reach out and you coordinate reward splits with other miners using the same coordinator as you, but that cannot be a middleman between you and Bitcoin itself. So when Ocean miners find blocks, they pay other miners out of their own blocks according to the split that we tell them. And then other miners on the pool pay you. And that is how you have the function of what a pool is supposed to be. So getting back to the what I'm going to call legacy pools, which is what 99% of the network is still on, or is around 98.5 now, because Ocean is growing. We're at 1.5% of the network. The legacy pool approach has been, the pool is the miner. It has the Bitcoin node, it syncs up to the network, it downloads the whole blockchain, it ends up at the tip of the chain, agrees it's all valid. Then it has a mempool, which it fills with unconfirmed transactions that it sources from the P2P network. And then it constructs a block template, which is an unsolved block. Then, and only then, does it give that work to a piece of hardware we typically call a Bitcoin miner, like an Antminer or a Watts miner, and says, hey, can you keep rolling SHA-256 until you solve a block, or you get something that satisfies network difficulty. And when you do that, tell me about it, and I'll tell the network, and then we have a block. That is what the process of solving a block looks like for mining, typically. And Ocean comes along and says, we don't want to do any of that except decide how the reward split goes. But as a miner, you need to run a node, you need to populate a mempool, you need to sync the chain, you need to construct a block template, you hash on it locally, which has big advantages I'll get into. And if you solve any blocks, very importantly, you tell the Bitcoin network about it. You don't tell us about it and have us tell the network, because then we can censor you. And that's very important, that we need to not be able to do such a thing. So what really defined Satoshi era mining was a pie chart that looked like that. We've all seen the pie chart on mempool space, right, where you have Foundry sitting at usually 25, 30%, Antpool and Friends, which is anywhere up to 40%. Then you have F2 Pool and Via BTC, which are separate-ish, and then you have a bunch of the friends, as we call them. They're all sub-pools like, SEC Crypto and Poolin and BTC.com and Brains. all of those are just ant pool, which is a problem. And I'll get into why centralization in mining is such a big problem right now. Bitcoin needs to be censorship resistant, and its censorship resistant is directly related to how decentralized mining is. And right now, Bitcoin is not censorship resistant because 2 companies in the world can collaborate to keep a transaction out of the blockchain if they want, because they can actually 51% attack the network. Because these 2 giant pools, even though they are made up of tens of thousands of individual miners, all of those miners have given up the function of creating block templates and deciding what actually goes in the chain. They're just hashers, they're not miners, and this is the whole point. We need to turn Bitcoin hashers into Bitcoin miners. And 51% attacks, we all know what 51% attacks are, very scary thing, and they can be pulled off and executed with less than 51%. 51% is just the number you need for it to be a guaranteed perpetual success. The fact that you have 2 companies that can pull off such a thing, really it is just a case of if something ends up in the chain that some authority somewhere decides doesn't belong in Bitcoin's blockchain, it's a transaction they don't like for whatever reason, they only need to get Foundry and Bitmain to agree with them or to submit to what it is they're trying to coerce them into doing. And they say, right, go back to block 920,000, whatever it is that we don't like, and remine the chain and construct a template that doesn't contain that transaction anymore and wipe out the chain that has existed since then and persist on that basis. And then, I don't really like talking about this so much because it is a viable attack for how you could have censorship in Bitcoin, and we are centralized enough in mining at the moment that this is actually possible. So I kind of like to zip my mouth shut a lot of the time and be like, maybe no one just thought of this yet, but the reality is Bitcoin is fully censorship prone at the moment. It's just that no one has taken it upon themselves to force the giant mining pools to do some kind of attack, like the one I'm sort of gently alluding to here. But the goal is to have a pie chart that looks like that. Because in that world, if the purple slice or the yellow slice decides I'm going to start censoring a transaction now, I'm not going to include it. And I use the word censorship very specifically. They would look at a government blacklist and they'd say, these UTXOs are all bad. None of my block templates will contain it. Therefore, none of my blocks will ever have that transaction. If they do it, it doesn't matter because all the other slices on the pie chart aren't going to do that. They're going to include it. So that's what makes Bitcoin incredibly censorship resistant. You really want a situation where if you make a transaction and it's the world's most controversial transaction, you want it to be the case that if a miner said, we don't like that transaction, that there are thousands of other miners that will include it in their blocks who have a good chance of finding a block in the next 10 minutes. Right now, you basically can only transact on Bitcoin if, I'll say 6 companies in the world say, all right, I'm fine with this transaction. But we've already kind of made some headway into fixing that. And that's incredibly necessary. So Ocean's design, as I've said, reworked this so that template construction, which is the intelligent part of mining, is now done at the mining level. And there's a lot of advantages to that. Like I said, the censorship resistance is great, but you have other fringe benefits too. Latency is gone. So this is a feature of Ocean. And I should mention, Datum is the protocol I'm referring to here. Datum is what allows miners to be miners again, but within a pooled context. So to explain more detailed, pooling is what every miner wants to do because variance sucks. You have a block every 10 minutes if you have the entire hash power of the network, and you have some percentage of that depending on what your hash rate is versus the overall hash rate of the network. And supposing you've got a BitAxe at home and it's telling you I'm going to find a block once every 10,000 years. The thing is, you've only got 2 weeks before you get the percentage of what that would equal before the network difficulty moves. And if the network difficulty goes up every 2 weeks, which on average it does, and you don't find a block in that 2-week period, then that period of luck is just gone and it's never reconciled. So if your BitAxe that you have at home and it's 1 terahash is telling you I need 15,000 years to find a block, if you mine for the next 15,000 years, the difficulty will have gone up consistently in that period, and it's now, 1 million years that you have to wait. So you're just never finding a block, most likely. So what you want to do as a miner, and any sensible miner typically does want to do this, is split rewards with other miners so that you have a realistic chance of finding a decent amount of blocks in any 2-week period or being a part of an effort to find blocks. That's what pooling is. And I will repeat that the concept of pooling is deviated from that. Pooling literally just means we all put our work together and we split rewards based on our contribution. That's what pooling is. And none of the pools you see on the network actually operate that way. The way the pools on the network work right now is they are just a giant solo miner that does all the elements of mining. They pay themselves in their own blocks, and then they pay hashers that contributed to finding those blocks after the fact. So the Datum protocol was to disrupt all this. Firstly, every time Ocean finds a block, a miner that made that block themselves pays themselves in the block according to the split that they deserve based on their work. Now, this is revolutionary because it requires real-time tracking, which no other pool has implemented because it's insanely difficult. So what happens is miners are submitting shares to Ocean consistently, and they're requesting work from their own local Stratum server, which is what Datum is. It's a Stratum server, and that's what creates work for miners. They generate work locally, which cuts out all the latency, and I'll mention that as a brief aside. If you're a miner and you have a big operation, but you don't have great internet, which is surprisingly common, even though obviously it's a digital internet-based ecosystem, miners go where the power is cheap. They don't go where the internet is great. So if you have 10,000 ant miners at some stranded gas site somewhere, you actually need, and you're running off some less than ideal internet, and you're using legacy pools, what happens is, it's a nightmare because every time there's a new network block, which happens 144 times a day, the legacy pool, has to send fresh work to 10,000 ant miners down a pretty bad internet connection, and you get a couple of seconds of wasted work, and that adds up. For a giant miner, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in lost revenue from being too long to get any fresh work from the pool. So with Ocean, that doesn't matter, because with Ocean, instead of sending work to 10,000 miners, we send a Coinbase split to one machine, which is a 10,000th of the amount of data. And then you generate work for all your machines individually, locally, and then you're not using the internet. You're just using your local Datum server to send work to ant miners on your local area network. The internet's not involved, so you can have terrible internet and reduce all the latency issues that way. So this is fantastic. And then the miners hash away. When they find a block, as mentioned, they submit it directly to the network. So when Datum sees that some work satisfies network difficulty, it immediately tells the Bitcoin node about it, and then the Bitcoin node broadcasts that block out to the network. And that's very important because we didn't do anything about that. We find out that one of our miners has found a block just the way the rest of the network does. Whereas with Foundry and Antpool and all the legacy pools, the block gets given to them, and if they approve of it, then they'll tell the network about it. But the miner, importantly, isn't running a Bitcoin node, and they don't even know they've found a block. So half the time, miners find blocks on Ocean, and they're very excited because for the first time, they have a block up there on the timeline that says the name of their operation, right? So if you're looking at the mempool space block timeline, you'll just see Foundry, Antpool. And then when an Ocean block comes along, it doesn't say Ocean, it says the name of the miner, or whatever it is they put in their Datum gateway. And so we have Penguin mining with us, we have Peak mining, we have a few other pools, a few other miners that I should probably respect their privacy, but sometimes they choose to label themselves. There have been a bunch of blocks called NiceHash lately. I don't know if that means NiceHash are mining with us or someone else called NiceHash, but whoever they are, they have 3 exahash on the pool, and they found a lot of blocks. And it's just a great process because all they do is they reduce their own variance. Instead of waiting around for however long it takes to find a block with 3 exahash, which might take you, 6 days or something, you join Ocean and now there's 15 exahash, so you find blocks 5 times faster and you get a fifth of the amount. That's all a pool is supposed to do. A pool is just supposed to say, hey, you're doing this much work. Here's 9 other guys doing the same amount of work. Let's pay ourselves 10 times more often, but only 10% of the amount. That's fantastic. That just makes your life easier, and it means you get more resolution, and you return to 100% luck within a 2-week difficulty period reliably, right? So that's very important. That's how That's a realistic way to do things. So I'll get into some of the practicalities of it, because decentralizing mining entirely on an idealistic level is basically not possible due to the limitations of how Bitcoin works. So small miners cannot find a block in a 2-week period reliably. So they're just burning electricity and basically playing the lottery, and they might just lose and go out of business. So they have to collaborate with other miners, but none of the protocols in which they might do so in a completely decentralized fashion exist when it comes to reward splits. Someone has to coordinate the reward split, and that needs to be a transparent entity, and that's what Ocean does. So we're the only pool with transparent stats, and we pay out a lot more than other pools because of that. And this was something that was, during our first year of operation, we ran overall at 92% luck, because we had a horrible first month. And we still outperformed all the competing pools, sometime to the tune of 30%. That did not persist over the next few years, so I don't want to overstate the case. But typically, we come out around 5% ahead of all of the legacy pools. And if you want to call bullshit on that, as you have every right to do, all of our payout information is public. So if you're a miner, I encourage you to look at what you've earned over the last 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, whatever time period it is. Look at what you've been paid by any of the legacy pools, then go onto ocean.xyz and look at the payouts of the miners that have been mining on Ocean, because all of our payout information is public. And compare it, and find a comparable miner, someone with the same hash rate you have, and look at what they got paid, and then look at what you got from your pool. And over pretty much any time period, you're going to see that it was a greater amount on Ocean, because we fundamentally are just not the same level of middleman. There is a greater amount of variance on Ocean because we are not a miner ourselves buying hash rate off of you and paying you on a 24-hour basis, regardless of if we find any blocks. That's the legacy pool method. We are just a coordination layer that says, when someone else finds a block, or you get paid. That's it. If no one finds a block, you don't get any money. Now, that guarantee is sometimes a bit disconcerting for miners to abandon, because all the legacy pools will pay you even if they don't find any blocks. And that gives miners the illusion of not having to deal with the natural chaos of the blockchain, which is something that miners just have to get used to dealing with. And miners have got this very fiat mentality lately of saying, there's no such thing as variance in Bitcoin. Because you all know sometimes the next block is 10 seconds after the block you just found, and sometimes the next block is 2 hours. It happens. And that's very difficult for miners to deal with, but it is the inherent random nature of the blockchain. And pools have eliminated that. The legacy approach has been to eliminate that completely by paying miners on a per-minute basis, regardless of if any blocks have been found. But what's been hidden there is rather like the airport currency exchanges that tell you 0% commission, and you get something like 18% worse than what you're seeing on the market, right? The percentages these pools charge obfuscate the real cost of having someone eliminate all the variance. So Ocean is the only pool out there at the moment that doesn't do that level of variance reduction. It just says, hey, if we're 15 exahash, you get the variance of a 15 exahash miner, even if you're only running a BitAxe. Because a 15 exahash miner finds a block every 11 hours. That's a lot of blocks in a 2-week period. You can reconcile to 100%. If you get unlucky in that, you're probably going to get lucky in comparison at some point within that window. And that means we take on a much smaller role. We're just a dumb pool. That's all we do. We just split work according to what miners have contributed, and we split payments on that basis, and we ask you to respect that split. And then when you take that split and put it in your blocks, and you prove to us that the work you're doing respects that split, then you get rewards from every other miner on the pool. And that's it. That's all we do. And as a result of us being fully transparent and not paying you for blocks that never happened, i.e. we don't make promises to pay you Bitcoins that don't exist, you get a bigger slice of the blocks that we do find. And slowly miners are adopting this model. It's been a grind. We launched 2 years ago. Getting the first exahash was the hardest. Getting the second was easier. As I said, we've grown and we've grown, and we've outpaced network difficulty by a lot. So we're now 1.6% of the overall network, which is life is starting to get easier. We're finding enough blocks now that it's no longer a news event when Ocean finds a block, because it used to be like a bomb would go off in Bitcoin every time Ocean found a block, because it might take a whole month. But that's not the case. We find a little more than 2 blocks a day now. So miners are enjoying a lot of variance reduction, and they're having improved revenue, and they are closer to the Bitcoin blockchain. So that's another fun element of it. It's sacrilegious to talk about because all Bitcoins and all UTXOs are equal, but Ocean is the only pool where you can have a UTXO with no input, if people are familiar with these terms. Every time you have some Bitcoins, that is a UTXO, and a UTXO had an input to create that UTXO. That was someone spending coins to send money to you. The exception to that is Coinbase rewards. That's what the company named itself after, is the Coinbase transaction. That is the magical first transaction in any block where the miner pays themselves freshly created Bitcoins. And we all know that's what halves every 4 years. But that transaction contains a bunch of outputs that have no input, because those are coins that came from nowhere. They are invented, created coins. And some people really like having those coins. They can't be spent for 100 network blocks because they're at greater risk of evaporating into thin air should there be a reorg. But our miners get paid in the Coinbase to the extent that is possible. And being a very practical project, we have to make a bunch of adjustments for that because we can only fit so many people in the outputs. So if you're one of the smaller miners on Ocean, sometimes you'll get paid in a follow-up transaction. But all this works very well because one of the saddest parts is that these virgin Bitcoins, all of the fresh coins that were being mined were going to a dozen addresses. 90% of all the outputs, in the last 2 years, excluding Ocean, was something like 70 addresses were getting all of the freshly mined Bitcoins. And when Ocean found its, first couple of blocks, suddenly that jumped up to 180 addresses. So that was another we more than doubled the number of entities getting paid directly by the Bitcoin network overnight, just by Ocean existing. And yeah, thank you. So fresh coin, I don't want to really encourage it because there's no such thing as a virgin Bitcoin, right? 1 BTC equals 1 BTC, but some people seem very compelled by it. Some people really want to mine on Ocean and get fresh coins out of the chain. And then what's usually fun about that is the wallet. This is so rare that, and like I mentioned, there's an 100-block cooldown before those coins become spendable imposed by the network itself. A lot of wallets don't understand that because that's how rare it is. So once a week I get an email in support for Ocean where someone says, you just paid me, but I don't have any coins in my wallet. What happened? And then I do some digging and I find out this wallet has no idea how to deal with Coinbase payouts because it's never happened before to anyone that's ever used this wallet. And then I usually email the support for whoever that company is it's happened with. It happened with Coinbase, the company Coinbase that named themselves after that type of transaction didn't know how to process Coinbase transactions. So that was a lot of fun. And it happened with some Swan customers, and I think River couldn't process it. Like, we had to deal with a lot of wallets that didn't understand this new transaction type. So, very practical project. Bitcoin is, I really believe, for pragmatists that want to do as well as you can with the limitations. Like, do we want faster blocks, bigger blocks? Like, all of these things would be nice, but they degrade other things, and you have to get into trade-off territory. And Ocean is the result of a lot of experience. It was a relaunch of a pool that was run by Luke and Jason for 6 years as an open source project that they ran for free. Jason had a few servers in his bedroom that had 20% of the network hash rate going through it. And this was all done for free, and the website existed, but it would break half the time. This was like back in the early days, right? But to get really far into it, that was still the legacy model, right? Ocean V1, which was Eligius, that was run, that pool made the block templates. It paid all the miners in the blocks, but it didn't decentralize mining. What we have now is actually decentralized mining. We don't decentralize reward splits because that's undecentralizable, sadly, but everything about it is mining. We call it solo mining, and that term is another one that's been used in different contexts, and I don't want to relitigate that because it gets tiresome, but Ocean miners are solo miners, even though they're splitting rewards with other people, because they're running their own node, they're verifying the blockchain for themselves, they're populating their own mempools, they're choosing what goes in their blocks, and they're broadcasting those blocks directly to the network without trusting a third party. All they're doing is paying other miners according to some third party split coordinating system that, you know, is a voluntary thing for them to participate in, that importantly doesn't have any control over them. So this is very important, and it brings us back to Satoshi era mining, because Ocean can be a giant, Ocean could be the biggest pie chart on the biggest slice of that pie chart. And if it were to be, and someone came and held a gun to our head and said, you can't include this transaction in the blockchain anymore, we'll say there's nothing we can do about that because our miners make our blocks. We can mess with their payments if you really want, but we can't control what they put in the chain. So, but, and I'll end the talk with this, if you really don't like what that miner is putting in the chain, because Ocean is permissionless and doesn't have any, it doesn't even have any accounts, let alone, you know, passport photos and things like that that you need to upload to the other pools. It's not custodian, it's nothing like that. I know I'm over time here. The most important part of it is, if Ocean blocks are showing up that contain transactions that governments don't like, all we can do is say, here is a Bitcoin address that belongs to that miner, go find them and tell them to stop. That's all. Thank you.